My daughter called me at 2 in the morning. Her voice was slurred, trembling with a terror that froze the blood in my veins. "Dad, please come get me," she whispered. When I arrived at her in-law's wealthy estate, her mother-in-law physically blocked the front door. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "She is not leaving. I am a retired construction contractor who spent a lifetime breaking through concrete and steel. No wooden door and no arrogant woman was going to keep me from my little girl." I forced my way in, and what I saw on that bedroom floor made my blood boil. Before I continue my story, please let me know what city or country you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe a father will do whatever it takes to protect his child. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 70 years old. For over 4 decades, I worked as a commercial construction contractor right here in Illinois. I spent my life dealing with blueprints, load-bearing walls, and cold, hard steel. I'm a man of logic and structure. You have to be when a single miscalculation can bring a 50-story building crashing down. I retired a few years ago, hoping to live a quiet life after losing my beloved wife Sarah a decade ago to a brutal illness. Sarah was the heart of our family. When she passed, she left behind a secret trust fund for our only daughter, Rachel. Rachel is 32 years old now, a dedicated pediatric nurse with a heart of gold. She married a man named Derek Thorne. Derek is a 35-year-old investment banker downtown. On paper, he is polished, successful, and charming. His mother, Evelyn Thorne, comes from old money up in the North Shore of Chicago. They live in a sprawling, isolated mansion that always felt more like a museum than a home to me. I never quite fit into their world of country clubs and cocktail parties. But I tolerated the condescension because Rachel seemed happy. I always taught my daughter to see the good in people. But sometimes people do not have any good in them at all. It all started on a freezing Tuesday night. I was asleep in my empty house when the sudden sharp ringing of my cell phone woke me up. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was exactly 2 in the morning. When you reach my age, a phone call at that hour never brings good news. I answered immediately. "Dad," a voice whispered. It was Rachel, but she did not sound like my daughter. Her words were heavily slurred, dragging together as if she were fighting just to keep her eyes open. "Rachel, sweetheart, what is wrong?" I asked, sitting up straight, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. "Dad, please come get me," she gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her tone was laced with absolute raw terror. "They will not let me." Before she could finish her sentence, there was a muffled thud, a sharp gasp, and the line went completely dead. I shouted her name into the receiver, but there was only silence. I did not waste a single second trying to call her back. My contractor instincts kicked in immediately. When an alarm sounds on a job site, you do not ask questions, you act. I threw off the blankets, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and ran out to my truck. I unlocked my safe and took out my legally registered firearm. I am not a violent man, but I am a fiercely protective father. I placed the weapon securely inside my truck glove box just in case. I did not know what I was walking into, but I knew my daughter was in grave danger. The drive to the North Shore usually takes 40 minutes. I made it in 25. The roads were deserted, covered in a thin layer of frost, but my mind was racing faster than my tires. Rachel is a nurse. She does not drink heavily. She does not take drugs. She is the most responsible, level-headed person I know. That slurred voice, that sheer panic, it simply did not make any logical sense. At 2:45 in the morning, my headlights swept across the imposing iron gates of the Thorne estate. The gates were surprisingly left wide open. I drove my truck right up the long, winding driveway and slammed it into park in front of their massive double doors. The house was entirely dark except for one dim light on the second floor, Rachel and Derek's bedroom. I pounded my heavy fists against the solid oak front door. I did not ring the doorbell. I hammered on the wood with the force of a man who was ready to tear the house down brick by brick. A few moments later, the door swung open. Standing there was Evelyn Thorne, Derek's mother. Any normal person woken up at 3 in the morning by frantic knocking would be in pajamas looking disheveled and confused, not Evelyn. She was fully dressed in a tailored blouse and expensive slacks. Her hair was perfectly styled and she wore a full face of makeup. She had not been sleeping, she had been awake waiting. "Victor, what on earth is the meaning of this disturbance?" she demanded, her voice dripping with cold, calculated arrogance. "Where is my daughter?" I demanded, stepping forward to enter the house. Evelyn crossed her arms and physically blocked the doorway, standing her ground with a defiant smirk. "Rachel is having a severe mental episode," she said smoothly, not a single trace of concern in her eyes. "She is completely hysterical. Derek gave her something to help her calm down, and she is finally resting. She cannot be disturbed right now. I suggest you go home, Victor. You are making a fool of yourself." I stared at this wealthy, entitled woman trying to dismiss me like I was the hired help. The stench of her lie was suffocating. I did not ask for her permission. I stepped forward using my broad shoulders to shove her aside. She stumbled back against the foyer wall, gasping in feigned outrage. "You cannot barge into my home," she shrieked. "Watch me," I growled. I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, ignoring her shrill protests echoing behind me. I reached the second-floor hallway and headed straight for the master suite. The door was locked tight. I did not hesitate. 30 years of swinging sledgehammers and kicking down drywall had not entirely left my aging bones. I raised my heavy work boot and kicked the door right below the handle. The expensive wood splintered, the lock gave way, and the door flew open with a loud, violent crash. I rushed into the room and my breath caught painfully in my throat. The room was a complete disaster. Designer lamps were overturned, and the silk bed sheets were torn and dragged onto the floor. And there, lying unconscious on the cold bathroom tile, was my little girl, Rachel. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her clothes were disheveled, and she was completely unresponsive. Her breathing was terribly shallow, barely a whisper of air escaping her lips. But what made my blood run freezing cold were her arms. Under the harsh, bright bathroom light, I saw dark, violent, finger-shaped bruises, wrapping completely around her pale skin. Someone had pinned her down with terrifying force. As a man who understands mechanics and leverage, I knew immediately that these were not marks from a simple fall. These were the undeniable marks of a brutal struggle. Before I could even reach out to check her pulse, I heard heavy, panicked footsteps rushing down the hallway. Derek lunged into the bedroom, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically from the broken door to my face. He stood there in this doorway, wearing silk pajama bottoms and a cashmere sweater that was completely unwrinkled. For a man who was supposedly jolted awake by a home invasion, his hair was perfectly styled, and he was not out of breath from panic. He was panting from exertion. My eyes locked onto his, and in that split second, I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered guilt before he hurriedly plastered on a mask of shock. "Call an ambulance right now," I roared my voice, shaking the expensive framed artwork on the walls. Derek took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Victor, please calm down. We do not need to involve emergency services. I am already handling this. I have my mother calling Dr. Harrison, our private family physician. He is discreet, and he knows how to handle these delicate family situations without making a public spectacle." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of his words. My daughter was lying unconscious on the cold marble floor, her breathing dangerously shallow, her skin turning an unnatural shade of pale, and this polished coward was worried about a public spectacle. "She is not breathing right," I snarled, stepping over the ruined wood of the doorframe and closing the distance between us. "Call 911 or I swear to God, Derek, I will break your jaw." He held his ground, though his jaw tightened. "You are not thinking clearly, Victor. You do not understand what is happening here. Rachel is having a severe episode. If the authorities come, they will put her on an involuntary psychiatric hold. It will ruin her career. It will ruin our reputation. Dr. Harrison is on his way. Just step back and let us take care of my wife." He made the fatal mistake of reaching out to grab my shoulder. I did not argue anymore. 40 years of hauling steel beams and breaking concrete had given me a physical density that this soft, manicured investment banker could not possibly match. I grabbed the front of his expensive cashmere sweater, twisted the fabric into my fist, and shoved him violently backward. Derek stumbled over the debris of the broken door and crashed hard against the hallway wall, gasping for air as the breath was knocked out of his lungs. "Do not ever touch me," I warned him in a low, deadly whisper. "And do not ever tell me how to take care of my own blood." I turned my back on him and knelt beside Rachel. Up close, the dark bruises on her arms looked even more horrifying. The distinct shape of fingers pressed deeply into her skin told a story of violence, of someone holding her down against her will. I carefully slid my arms beneath her knees and behind her back, lifting her from the floor. She was heartbreakingly light, completely limp in my embrace. As I held her against my chest, a sudden wave of memories washed over me. I remembered carrying her exactly like this, when she was a little girl fast asleep after a long day at the park, safe and protected in her father's arms. The contrast between that beautiful memory and this nightmare fueled a burning fire in my gut. I carried her out into the hallway. Evelyn was waiting at the top of the grand staircase, her face pale with fury. "You are making a terrible mistake, Victor," she hissed, her manicured fingers gripping the banister. "You are tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding." I did not waste a single breath responding to her. I carried Rachel down the stairs, out through the heavy front doors and straight to my truck. I carefully laid her across the back seat, securing her with a seat belt and wrapping my heavy winter coat around her shivering body. Just as I was about to climb into the driver's seat, Derek scrambled out of the house and threw himself into the passenger seat. "If you are taking her, I am coming with you," he demanded, his chest heaving. "I am her husband. I have the legal right to be there." I did not have the time to drag him out of the vehicle. Every second mattered. I slammed the door, started the engine, and tore down the winding driveway, leaving the iron gates of the Thorne estate far behind. The drive to City General Hospital was a tense, suffocating blur. I drove recklessly, breaking every speed limit while Derek sat beside me in the dark, feverishly typing messages on his phone. When we finally screeched to a halt in front of the emergency room doors, I carried Rachel inside, shouting for help. A team of nurses rushed forward with a gurney, instantly taking over. But before I could even explain the situation, a tall man in a pristine white coat emerged from a side office. He walked with a familiar, arrogant stride. I noticed his name badge immediately, Dr. Harrison. He bypassed me entirely and walked straight to Derek. "Derek, your mother called me," the doctor said, his voice hushed and far too calm for a medical emergency. "I have a private trauma room ready. We will handle this quietly." I stepped forward, my hands clenched into tight fists. "I want a full blood panel done immediately," I stated, looking the doctor squarely in the eye. "I want to know exactly what is in her system, and I want an examination of the contusions on her arms." Dr. Harrison looked at me as if I were a piece of dirt he had just scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you, we provide the highest standard of care here. However, Derek is her legal next of kin. I will be discussing her treatment plan exclusively with him." He gestured to two large security guards who suddenly appeared behind him. "Please wait in the family area. You are not permitted in the trauma room." The guards stepped forward, forming a solid wall between my daughter and me. I knew that fighting them would only get me arrested, leaving Rachel entirely isolated with these people. I swallowed the bitter taste of bile in my throat and forced myself to step back, retreating to the sterile, brightly lit waiting area. Through a narrow glass panel down the hall, I could see the monitors flashing inside Rachel's room. I sat down on a hard plastic chair, leaning my elbows on my knees, and let my mind do what it had been trained to do for 4 decades. I analyzed the structure. When you spend your entire life building commercial high-rises, you develop a sixth sense for recognizing when a foundation is flawed. You learn to spot the tiny hairline fractures in a concrete slab that indicate an unstable base. You learn that when a steel beam buckles, It leaves a specific pattern of stress marks. Physical evidence never lies. People lie, but the structural damage always tells the exact truth of what happened. I closed my eyes and mentally reconstructed the bruises on Rachel's arms. The angle of the thumbprints, the deep purple contusions pressing into the soft tissue of her inner biceps. If she had fallen down the stairs, as Evelyn's blocked door and Derek's panic seemed to imply the impact, trauma would be random. There would be scrapes on her elbows, defensive bruising on her forearms from trying to catch her fall. But Rachel did not have random impact trauma. She had targeted pressure points. Someone had held her down by her arms with terrifying sustained force. The structural narrative they were trying to sell me was a complete fabrication. The foundation of their story was rotting from the inside out. An hour crawled by in agonizing silence. Finally, the heavy doors of the trauma unit pushed open, and Dr. Harrison walked toward the waiting area, holding a silver metal clipboard. Derek stood up instantly, rubbing his eyes to produce a fresh layer of artificial tears. Dr. Harrison stopped in front of us, his expression molded into a mask of professional sympathy. Victor. He began using my first name with unwarranted familiarity. We have stabilized Rachel's vitals, but the situation is incredibly grave. He handed the clipboard not to me, but directly to Derek. I leaned over to read the bright red print on the top page. It was a rapid toxicology report. Rachel's blood contains a highly lethal combination of severe anxiety medications and a massive amount of alcohol, the doctor explained smoothly, locking his gaze onto Derek. Her system is completely overwhelmed. It is a miracle her heart did not simply stop. As soon as the words left the doctor's mouth, Derek collapsed into the nearest plastic chair. He buried his face deep in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently as he let out a loud theatrical sob that echoed off the linoleum walls. "I am so sorry," Derek wept, his voice cracking with rehearsed devastation. "I knew she was stressed at the clinic, but I had no idea it was this bad. I tried to grab the pills from her. I tried to hold her down, but she fought me. I failed. I failed to stop her suicide attempt." I stood there in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the hospital, the crisp, white toxicology report still gripped tightly in my weathered hands. Derek's theatrical sobbing echoed against the pale linoleum floors. He buried his face deep in his expensive cashmere sleeves, acting the part of the devastated husband with sickening precision. I did not move to comfort him. I simply waited. After a few carefully timed moments, Derek wiped his face, taking a deep, shuddering breath before looking up at me. His eyes were completely dry. "Victor, I did not want to tell you this," Derek began, his voice dropping to a somber, conspiratorial whisper. "I wanted to protect her dignity. But Rachel has been spiraling out of control for months. The immense pressure at the pediatric clinic, losing those desperately sick children, it completely broke her. She started having severe panic attacks back in October. At first, it was just trouble sleeping through the night. Then the situation escalated rapidly. She began drinking heavily in secret to numb the pain. She hid bottles of wine in the back of her closet, burying them underneath her winter sweaters, where she thought I would never find them. I stared at him, my face a mask of impenetrable stone. I did not interrupt his performance. I let him build the framework of his elaborate lie. When you construct a building with cheap, substandard materials, you want the dishonest contractor to keep stacking the bricks until the entire structure collapses under its own fraudulent weight. I knew how to listen to the groans of failing steel. Derek gestured frantically toward the closed trauma room doors. Tonight, things reached an absolute boiling point. He continued his tone, pleading for my sympathy. She was completely incoherent, screaming wildly about how she could not take the pain anymore. She swallowed a massive handful of pills and washed them down with half a bottle of cheap Merlot. When I tried to intervene and stop her, she lost her mind. She ran straight toward the second-story window in our bedroom. She was actually trying to throw herself out onto the concrete. Victor. I had to tackle her to the floor to save her. I had to pin her down by her arms with all my body weight just to keep her from killing herself. That is exactly where those bruises came from. I was only trying to save her life. Before I could dissect the gaping holes in his ridiculous fabricated story, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of high heels announced the arrival of Evelyn Thorne. She glided down the hospital corridor, looking just as immaculate as she had standing at her front door. She carried a sleek designer handbag and wore an expression of profound, heavily manufactured tragedy. She walked right up to me, placing a perfectly manicured hand gently on my forearm. "Oh, Victor," Evelyn sighed, her voice dripping with thick artificial pity. "This is a massive tragedy for all of us. We are simply heartbroken to see her this way. We have been trying so hard to get Rachel the psychiatric help she desperately needs. But addiction is a terrible, wicked disease. It turns the bright people we love into unrecognizable strangers." She elegantly unclasped her expensive leather handbag and reached inside. She pulled out a small orange plastic cylinder and pressed it firmly into my palm. I looked down at the object in my hand. It was a prescription pill bottle. The printed label clearly bore my daughter's name, Rachel Caldwell Thorne. Below her name, the prescribed medication was listed in bold, unapologetic black letters. Alprazolam 2 milligrams. The prescription was dated exactly 3 weeks ago, signed by none other than Dr. Harrison himself. "I wanted to show you this so you would fully understand the grim reality of the situation," Evelyn murmured, stepping back to stand shoulder-to-shoulder with her son. "We did not want to worry you with her ongoing daily struggles. We know exactly how much you adore her, and we did not want you to judge your only daughter for her unfortunate weakness. She has been secretly self-medicating for several months now. Tonight was simply the inevitable, terrifying breaking point. We are just so incredibly thankful that Derek was there to stop her from doing the unthinkable and ending her own life." My calloused thumb traced the smooth plastic ridges of the pill bottle. Inside my mind, heavy gears were turning, locking firmly into place. The story they presented was exceptionally neat. It was incredibly tidy, wrapped up in a perfect little bow. A deeply stressed pediatric nurse turning to wine and prescription drugs to cope with the immense trauma of losing young patients. A loving, heroic husband stepping in at the last possible second to prevent a tragic, bloody suicide. It was the exact kind of dramatic narrative that high society families in the North Shore loved to whisper about at their lavish charity galas. It was a calculated story designed entirely to generate profound pity for Derek and Evelyn, while simultaneously discrediting my daughter and labeling her as an unstable liability. I looked directly from Evelyn to Derek, my stony expression giving absolutely nothing away. I silently pocketed the pill bottle, securing it deep inside my jacket. If they wanted to play a dangerous game of documentation, I was going to hold on to every single piece of physical evidence they foolishly handed me. "I need to see her right now," I stated, my voice low, growly, and dangerously calm. "I need to speak to the attending physician about transferring her to a different medical facility for an unbiased second opinion." Derek's relaxed posture immediately stiffened into a rigid line. The pitiful mask of the weeping, traumatized husband vanished without a trace, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating demeanor of a ruthless corporate shark. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out a thick stack of neatly folded legal documents, heavily stamped with an official blue notary seal. "That will not be happening, Victor," Derek said, his tone turning as hard and unforgiving as poured concrete. "I am her legally wedded husband, and I currently hold her comprehensive medical proxy. I alone make all critical healthcare decisions on her behalf." He unfolded the crisp documents and shoved them aggressively toward my chest. I glanced down at the bold heading. It was a standard spousal proxy granting Derek absolute uncontested authority over Rachel's physical and psychiatric care. The shaky signature at the very bottom was unmistakably Rachel's. "Dr. Harrison and I have already thoroughly discussed the absolute best course of action for her long-term recovery." Derek continued, stepping uncomfortably closer to me to assert his sudden dominance. "Rachel requires intense, Highly specialized psychiatric intervention immediately. Ni. This public hospital cannot possibly provide the high level of strict security she desperately needs right now. I have already arranged for a rapid private medical transport. She is being transferred to the exclusive Silver Pines' wellness retreat tonight. You have absolutely no legal power to stop me from transferring my sick wife, and you know it. You are just completely powerless right now. The heavy legal papers in Derek's hand felt like a concrete wall slamming directly into my chest. My contractor instinct screamed at me to grab him by the throat, to tear those documents into pieces, and to physically drag my daughter out of that hospital. My muscles twitched, and the blood pounded in my ears with a deafening roar. I wanted to fight. I wanted to dismantle this smug, arrogant man standing in front of me. But then I looked past his tailored shoulder. I saw the two massive security guards shifting their weight, their hands resting near their radios. I saw Dr. Harrison glaring at me, his finger hovering over the hospital panic button. I realized instantly that if I threw a single punch right now, if I let my righteous anger win, I knew exactly what would happen. I would be arrested for assault. I would be handcuffed, dragged out of the emergency room, and thrown into a holding cell. And Rachel would be left completely alone, utterly defenseless against a husband and a mother-in-law who had just orchestrated her rapid disappearance. They wanted me to lose my temper. They were actively begging for me to cause a physical scene so they could validate their twisted narrative. They wanted to point at me and tell the police, "Look at the violent, unstable father." I took a deep, agonizing breath. I forced my clenched hands to open, stretching my stiff fingers out by my sides. I had to build a temporary bridge. I had to play a role I had never played in my entire 70 years of life. I had to be the defeated, oblivious, broken old man. I let my shoulders slump forward deliberately, dropping my posture to look smaller and frailer than I actually was. I let out a long, shaky sigh, letting my chin fall toward my chest. "You are right, Derek," I said, making my voice tremble just enough to sound thoroughly crushed. "You are her husband. You have the legal proxy. I am just a frightened father who panicked when he got that terrible phone call. I do not know anything about modern medicine or psychiatric treatments. I just saw my little girl on the floor, and I completely lost my mind." Derek relaxed instantly. The rigid defensive posture vanished, replaced by a sickeningly triumphant stance. He tucked the legal documents back into his expensive blazer, adjusting his lapels with a smooth, practiced motion. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable, Victor," he said, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "This is a very complex medical situation. It requires a delicate, sophisticated touch, something you simply cannot provide." Evelyn stepped forward, a triumphant smirk playing at the corners of her perfectly painted lips. She reached out and patted my shoulder, her touch feeling like absolute ice against my coat. "We know this is incredibly difficult for you to process, Victor," she cooed, her voice echoing in the sterile hallway. "But you have to understand we are doing what is absolutely best for our family. Rachel is a thorn now. We protect our own. You just go home. Rest your tired old mind. Leave the heavy lifting to us." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes cast downward. "I will step back," I whispered, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. "I will let you handle her recovery. Just please keep me updated on her condition." "Of course we will," Derek lied smoothly. "The clinic will call you when she is stable enough to receive visitors, which might take a few weeks given her severe mental state." At that exact moment, the heavy double doors of the emergency room slid open. Two burly men, wearing dark, unmarked paramedic uniforms, walked in pushing a specialized transport gurney. They did not look like standard hospital staff. They looked like private security contractors. Dr. Harrison met them halfway, speaking in low, hushed tones before leading them directly into the trauma room. I stood frozen in the waiting area, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces as the men wheeled Rachel out. She was completely strapped down to the gurney, heavy leather restraints crisscrossing over her chest and legs. An oxygen mask covered her pale face, and an intravenous drip was taped to the back of her bruised hand. She looked so incredibly fragile, completely lost to the heavy sedatives pumping through her veins. Derek and Evelyn walked purposefully alongside the gurney, whispering instructions to the private transport team. They did not even glance back at me as they escorted my unconscious daughter out the sliding glass doors and into the freezing Chicago night. I watched through the window as they loaded her into a sleek black transport van. There were no flashing ambulance lights. There were no hospital logos. It was a phantom vehicle designed to make people disappear without a single trace. The doors slammed shut, the engine roared to life, and the van pulled away, vanishing into the cold darkness. I was completely alone in the sterile, silent hospital lobby. The victory they felt must have been intoxicating. They thought they had successfully outsmarted me. They thought they had removed the annoying blue-collar father from the equation. But they had made a monumental miscalculation. They forgot that I spent my entire career inspecting huge commercial structures for hidden flaws. They handed me a blueprint built entirely on lies, and now I was going to systematically tear it apart. I walked out to my truck, my boots crunching heavily against the frost-covered pavement. The drive back to my empty house was a blur of streetlights and shadows. The silence inside the cab of my truck was deafening, pressing against my eardrums. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying images. The violent bruises on Rachel's arms, Evelyn's immaculate makeup at 3:00 in the morning, Derek's dry theatrical sobs, the swift, calculated arrival of the unmarked transport van. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale gray light over the quiet neighborhood. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the crushing silence of my home. The air felt incredibly heavy and suffocating. I walked directly into the kitchen, operating on pure mechanical autopilot. I filled the coffee pot with water, scooped the grounds into the filter, and hit the power button. The familiar rhythmic dripping of the machine was the only sound in the house. I leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, rubbing my tired eyes with the palms of my hands. My gaze drifted slowly across the room, eventually landing on the wooden mantel above the fireplace in the adjoining living room. Sitting right in the center was a framed photograph from Rachel's college graduation. She was standing between Sarah and me, beaming with absolute pride, wearing her crisp nursing uniform. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the heavy silver frame. I stared at her bright, intelligent eyes. I remembered the day she graduated. I remembered the celebratory dinner we had at an expensive Italian restaurant downtown. I remembered her laughing, raising her glass to make a toast, and then, like a massive steel beam crashing directly into my chest, a glaring discrepancy hit me. The impact of the realization was so incredibly violent that I actually stumbled backward, dropping the framed photograph onto the carpet. Derek had stood right there in the hospital hallway and told me a highly detailed story. He had looked me right in the eye and claimed that Rachel was hiding bottles of wine in her closet. He claimed she swallowed a handful of anxiety pills and washed them down with half a bottle of cheap Merlot to numb her depression. It was the core foundation of his entire suicide narrative. But Rachel is severely allergic to sulfites. The memory hit me with crystal clearer precision. When she was 18 years old, she took a single sip of red wine at a family wedding. Within 10 minutes, her throat began to close. She broke out in terrible hives, and we had to rush her to the emergency room for an epinephrine injection. The doctors told her that consuming even a small glass of wine could trigger a fatal anaphylactic shock. Rachel knew this. She was a brilliant pediatric nurse who understood pharmacology better than anyone. She had not touched a single drop of wine in 14 long years. She would never under any circumstances drink half a bottle of Merlot. It would have killed her before the pills even reached her stomach. The story was a complete fabricated lie. The wine, the pills, the suicide attempt, the panic. It was all a carefully constructed stage play, and the bruises on her arms. They were not defensive marks from a husband trying to save his wife from a fall. They were restraint marks. They had held her down. They had physically forced those pills down her throat. My breathing grew ragged, my chest heaving as the horrifying truth locked firmly into place. My daughter did not have a psychotic break. She was attacked in her own home. She was poisoned by the very people who were supposed to protect her, and now they had locked her away in a secure facility where no one could hear her scream. I stood alone in my quiet living room, the early morning sunlight slowly creeping across the floorboards. The grief and confusion that had clouded my mind completely evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifying clarity. Derek and Evelyn Thorne thought they had won. They thought they had safely disposed of the problem. They thought I was just an ignorant, tired old man who would simply fade into the background. They were dead wrong. I am a builder, but I also know exactly how to tear things down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small orange pill bottle Evelyn had given me. I squeezed it tightly in my fist until the hard plastic cracked. They wanted a war in the shadows. They were going to get one. I walked toward the hallway closet to grab my heavy coat once again. I was not going to sit around and wait for updates. I was going to find out exactly why they were trying to murder my little girl. I shrugged my heavy winter coat onto my shoulders, but my hand paused on the brass doorknob. Rushing back out into the freezing night without a structural plan was a rookie mistake. A good contractor never starts swinging a sledgehammer until he reviews the blueprints. Derek and Evelyn were playing a high-stakes game insulated by their massive wealth and private security. If I charged the gates of that wellness retreat right now, they would have me arrested for trespassing, and I would lose my only chance to save my daughter. I needed leverage. I needed to understand the load-bearing walls of their deception. I turned away and walked down the shadowed hallway toward my private study. The cold room was lined with oak bookshelves and filing cabinets filled with decades of commercial construction permits. I moved directly to the corner of the room, kneeling on the worn rug. I pulled back a heavy wool runner to reveal a solid steel floor safe. I installed it myself 20 years ago, pouring the concrete casing perfectly so it could never be compromised. I spun the cold metal dial, the rhythmic metallic clicks grounding my racing thoughts. 34 to the right, 12 to the left, 58 to the right. The heavy locking bolts slid back with a satisfying definitive thud. I reached deep into the dark cavity of the safe past old property deeds, retirement portfolios, and military discharge papers. My calloused fingers brushed against a thick sealed manila envelope. I pulled it out and set it on the mahogany desk. My hands trembled slightly as I untied the string closure. Inside were the comprehensive financial documents my late wife Sarah had put together before the illness took her from us. Sarah was an incredibly wise woman. She inherited a substantial sum from her family money. She deliberately kept separate from my construction business. She always said that wealth could either be a stepping stone or a heavy anchor, depending entirely on the maturity of the person holding it. Before she passed, she established an ironclad trust fund for Rachel. It was heavily protected, overseen by a ruthless financial attorney named Mitchell, and it was designed with one very specific, unyielding condition. I spread the crisp, aged legal papers across the surface of my desk, running my index finger down the columns of dense legal jargon. I stopped at the final page, staring at the bold numbers near Sarah's elegant signature. The trust fund was originally seeded with $4 million. Over the last 10 years, through aggressive, highly secure market investments, that number had grown significantly. The current valuation of the trust sat at exactly $8 million. I moved my finger down to the access clause. Rachel was the sole beneficiary, but she could not touch a single penny of the principal capital until she reached full maturity. The trust was legally locked until her 32nd birthday. I looked up, staring blankly at the dark window across the study. My heart began to pound with a slow, terrifying rhythm. I calculated the exact dates. Rachel had celebrated her 32nd birthday exactly 14 days ago. The timing was not a coincidence. In the construction business, There are no coincidences. When a pipe bursts the exact same day, the water pressure is artificially increased. You know exactly who tampered with the valve. For 3 years, Derek had played the role of the devoted, supportive husband. He had never once displayed this level of erratic, controlling behavior. But now, exactly 2 weeks after my daughter suddenly gained access to $8 million in liquid, untraceable cash, she is mysteriously poisoned, bruised, and locked away in a private psychiatric facility where her husband holds absolute uncontested legal authority over her life. Derek did not want to cure my daughter. He wanted to declare her mentally unfit. If Rachel was legally incapacitated, her husband, wielding his comprehensive medical proxy, could petition the courts for a financial conservatorship. He could seize control of the entire $8 million, claiming it was necessary to fund her long-term, specialized psychiatric care. The pristine, plausible lie about her addiction was the exact foundation he needed to present to a judge. He was trying to steal her inheritance, and he was willing to medically torture her to get it. I slumped into my leather desk chair, the sheer breathtaking evil of their plan washing over me. I needed to warn Mitchell. I needed to freeze that trust immediately before Derek could file the conservatorship papers. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my cell phone. The bright screen illuminated the dark study. As I unlocked the device to search for Mitchell's contact information, a small, glaring red notification icon caught my eye. It was the voicemail indicator. The icon showed one unheard message. I frowned, tapping the screen. I am an old man, and I occasionally struggle with the interface of modern smartphones, often swiping away notifications by accident. I looked at the details of the missed message. It was from Rachel. The timestamp indicated it had been left 3 days ago, right in the middle of my busy Tuesday afternoon, when I was running loud power tools in my garage workshop. I had completely missed it. I pressed the phone tightly against my ear, my breath catching in my throat as the automated voice announced the date and time. Then a sharp hiss of static filled the speaker, followed by Rachel's voice. She did not sound slurred or sedated like she had tonight. She sounded sharp, alert, and undeniably terrified. She was whispering rapidly, the sound of a locking door clicking shut in the background. "Dad, it is me," she whispered, her voice shaking with raw, unfiltered panic. "I really need you to call me back the absolute second you get this message. Do not text me. Call me. Something is terribly wrong with Derek. He has been locking himself in his home office for days, screaming at people on the phone about offshore margins and missing capital. I found some bank statements hidden in his briefcase. Dad, I think he is completely bankrupt. He has been forging my signature on small loan applications." She paused, taking a ragged, trembling breath. I could hear the sheer terror vibrating through the tiny speaker. "He asked me to transfer my trust fund into a joint corporate account this morning. He said it was for a temporary investment, but his eyes were so cold. When I told him I needed to consult with Mitchell first, he completely lost his temper. He smashed a glass against the wall. I have never seen him like this. I told him I am going to call my lawyer and file for financial separation. I need you to find Mom's original death certificate and the primary trust documents in your safe. I need to prove the money is exclusively mine. Dad, please. I am scared to be in this house with him right now. Call me." The voicemail ended with a sharp beep. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it on top of the $8 million trust document. The entire puzzle was now assembled. Every single jagged piece fit perfectly together. Rachel had discovered Derek's financial ruin. She had refused to hand over her inheritance, and she had threatened him with a divorce. Derek was backed into a corner facing absolute bankruptcy and the humiliating loss of his elite social status. He could not convince her to sign over the money willingly, so he and his ruthless mother had pivoted to their horrific contingency plan. They decided to silence her. They drugged her with sedatives, staged a suicidal breakdown, and shipped her off to a private facility to rot, paving the way for a hostile legal takeover of her entire estate. My daughter was a financial hostage. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the raw, violent anger inside me transforming into something entirely different. It became a cold, methodical, and calculating fury. I was not going to simply react. I was not going to play into their hands by throwing punches and getting myself arrested. That is what they wanted. They wanted the loud, ignorant contractor to make a scene. Instead, I was going to do what I had done my entire professional life. I was going to secure the perimeter, assemble my crew, and systematically demolish their lives. I was going to rip their pristine, wealthy facade down to the dirt, and I was going to extract my daughter from the wreckage. I picked up my phone and scrolled past Mitchell's name. I needed a lawyer, yes, but first I needed a demolition expert. I needed someone who knew how to operate in the shadows, outside the polite, restrictive boundaries of the law. I dialed a number I had not called in over 5 years. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff, tired voice finally answered the line. "Leon, it is Victor," I said, keeping my voice steady in the dark study. "I need your help. I have a structural collapse on my hands, and I need a man who knows how to navigate the rubble." The gruff voice chuckled softly. "Tell me where and when, Victor." I told him we would meet later that evening, ending the call. Leon was a retired police detective turned private investigator. We worked together years ago when a corrupt supplier tried to scam my construction firm. He knew how to dig up dirt buried under corporate shell companies. But before I unleashed him on Derek and Evelyn, I needed to walk right into the belly of the beast and see the panic for myself. By 9 the next morning, I had pulled a thick folder of Rachel's childhood medical records from my filing cabinet. It was the perfect excuse for an unannounced visit. I drove downtown to the towering glass skyscraper that housed Derek's prestigious investment firm. The building was an architectural marvel designed to project an image of absolute transparency and immense wealth. Wet, I knew better. Buildings with the most glass usually had the darkest basement. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The reception area of Thorn Financial Investments was intimidating. The floors were polished marble, and the walls were paneled in rich walnut. A smartly dressed receptionist sat behind a massive desk. I approached her, letting my shoulders slump, playing the role of the exhausted, grieving father to perfection. "Excuse me, miss," I said, making my voice sound a bit raspy. "I am Victor Caldwell, Derek's father-in-law. I do not have an appointment, but I brought some urgent medical records for my daughter, Rachel. Derek needs these for the clinic she was admitted to last night." The receptionist looked up, her expression softening into immediate sympathy. "Oh, Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry to hear about your daughter. Mr. Thorne has been utterly devastated all morning. He instructed us to hold his calls, but since it is a medical emergency, I will let him know you are here. Please have a seat in the corridor outside his office suite. It is the last door on the right." She gestured toward a quiet hallway. I thanked her and walked slowly in the direction she pointed. The carpet absorbed my footsteps. As I approached the final mahogany door, I noticed it was left ajar by just a fraction of an inch. I stopped dead in my tracks. I did not sit in the waiting chairs. Instead, I stepped closer to the narrow crack, pressing my back flat against the wall, holding my breath. Inside the office, Derek was not weeping over his sick wife. He was screaming, "I do not care what you have to tell the auditors." Derek hissed, his voice trembling with violent manic energy. "You move that capital by the end of the day. If those margin calls hit my desk tomorrow morning, we are completely finished. Do you understand me? You bury the deficit. You hide it under the shell accounts we set up in Delaware. Just buy me 72 hours. A loud smash echoed through the room like a paper weight shattering. "Do not tell me it is impossible." Derek roared, losing his polished composure entirely. "Foreclosure notices are already in my inbox. If the board finds out I have been leveraging client funds to cover my own catastrophic losses, I am going to federal prison. You stall them until Friday." My chest tightened. The words were a direct confirmation of Rachel's frantic voicemail. Derek had embezzled millions of dollars, and his entire life was crashing down. Then a second voice cut through the tension. It was sharp, venomous, and chillingly calm. It was Evelyn. Get a hold of yourself, Derek. She snapped, her tone dripping with utter disdain. Screaming at subordinates is not going to fix this. You are acting like a frightened child. We have an impenetrable plan, and you are going to ruin it with your panic. I peered through the opening. Evelyn was pacing across the extravagant office. She looked like a predator circling a cage. The money is there. Evelyn continued, her voice lowering to a commanding whisper. Rachel's trust fund is fully mature, $8 million in untraceable liquid assets. It is more than enough to cover the deficit, pay off the estate mortgage, and quiet the federal auditors before they open an investigation. All we need is for the judge to sign the conservatorship paperwork on Friday morning. I cannot take this waiting, Derek groaned, sounding like a man on the edge of a total psychological collapse. What if the clinic asks questions? What if her father starts digging around? Evelyn scoffed. Her father is an ignorant relic. He was practically crying in the hospital waiting room. He believes exactly what we told him. As for the clinic, I own a 40% stake in that facility. Meet the staff there knows exactly who pays their lucrative salaries. They will not ask a single question. Just keep the girl sedated until Friday. Once the judge grants you absolute legal guardianship, we transfer the funds and we wash our hands of this mess. If her brain turns to mush from the sedatives, it only proves our tragic narrative. My blood turned to absolute ice. They were casually discussing the permanent destruction of my daughter's mind to cover their financial crimes. They were going to leave her an institutionalized vegetable. I felt explosive rage rising in my throat. I wanted to kick the mahogany door off its hinges and silence his pathetic voice forever, but violence would only forfeit the game. I needed to destroy them legally. Suddenly, the leather chair squeaked. Footsteps marched toward the door. I quickly stepped back, dropping the manila folder onto the floor. The door swung wide open. Derek stood in the doorway, his face flushed red, sweating profusely. He froze the instant he saw me kneeling on the floor. Unadulterated terror flashed across his face. He stopped breathing, trying to calculate how much I had heard. I looked up at him, molding my expression into mild confusion and profound weariness. "Oh, Derek," I sighed, forcing my hands to tremble as I picked up the papers. "I am sorry. I did not mean to intrude. The receptionist told me to wait here, but my clumsy hands dropped the folder. I hope I did not interrupt a business call." Derek searched my weathered face for any sign of deception. Finding nothing but the broken facade of a grieving father, his panic dissolved. The arrogant mask slipped right back into place. He adjusted his tie and offered a fake smile. "Victor," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth, "you did not interrupt anything, just standard routine market fluctuations. Come inside, come." I stood up slowly, clutching the medical records. I played dumb, but the fire inside me was burning hotter than a furnace. I knew the truth. This was a financial hostage situation, and I needed professional backup to burn their entire empire to the ground. The old roadside diner smelled strongly of dark roasted coffee and greasy fried bacon. It was a loud, wonderfully chaotic place right off the busy interstate. I sat in a sticky vinyl booth in the far back corner, nursing black coffee. Across from me sat my friend Leon and attorney Mitchell. Leon had a gray mustache and eyes that constantly scanned the room, analyzing every patron. He spent 30 years as a police detective before opening a private firm. Next to him sat Mitchell Serra's financial attorney. Mitchell was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who navigated corporate finance with ruthless efficiency. I laid out the entire situation. I told them about the forged narrative, the sulfite allergy discrepancy, the fake suicide attempt, and the $8 million trust fund. I told them how I watched private security roll my sedated daughter into a phantom transport van. Mitchell stared at the table. "If Derek holds a medical proxy, and your daughter signed it willingly, we are blocked on the legal front," Mitchell explained. "If we go to the police, Derek will simply wave that document in their faces. He will claim he is making medical decisions for a spouse suffering from addiction. The authorities will not intervene in a private medical dispute. The law perfectly protects him." Leon nodded. "Mitchell is right, Victor. If you force a wellness check, Derek's lawyers will slap you with a restraining order. They have placed Rachel inside a legal fortress. They can hold her in that facility, keep her medicated, and wait for Friday morning to finalize the financial conservatorship. We cannot hit them head-on. We must slip through the cracks. I need you to freeze that trust, Mitchell, I said, leaning over the table. You need to put a lock on that money so tight that Derek cannot extract a single dime. I can file an injunction based on coercion, Mitchell replied, but I cannot do it until Friday morning when the courts open. If I tip our hand early, Derek's legal team will counterfile, dragging it out in litigation. We need proof of his financial distress to justify the freeze. That is where I come in. Leon said, I will dig into Derek's offshore accounts and corporate shell games. By Friday morning, I will have a report proving he is entirely bankrupt. But Victor, we have a massive problem. We do not know where they took Rachel. Silver Pines is a corporate umbrella owning a dozen private facilities across the state. We must find her physical location before Friday or Derek might move her to keep her hidden. I looked at the two men risking their careers to help my family. You handle the money, I stated softly. I will find my daughter, but first I need to make them think they have completely won. I walked out of the warm diner and sat in the cold cab of my heavy truck. The freezing air stung my lungs. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Derek's personal number. I cleared my throat carefully, forcing my voice to drop an octave lower. I needed to sound frail, broken, and utterly defeated. Derek answered on the second ring. Victor, he said, his voice projecting a completely fake, incredibly soothing warmth. How are you holding up today on this terrible morning? I am not doing well, Derek, I rasped, letting a heavy, trembling sigh escape my lips. My arthritis is flaring up terribly from the cold, and my heart is completely broken. Sitting in this empty house, looking at Rachel's photographs, it is driving me out of my mind. I cannot stop thinking about her lying in that hospital bed. I feel completely useless. I could practically hear the arrogant smirk forming on Derek's face. You have been through a massive shock, Victor. It is completely understandable that you feel overwhelmed. You need to focus on your own health right now. We have everything under control here. Rachel is receiving the best care possible. I know, I whispered, sounding thoroughly crushed. That is why I am calling. I cannot stay in this house right now. I need to get away from everything. I am packing my truck to head up to my old fishing cabin in northern Wisconsin. It is completely off the grid. No cell service, no internet, just woods and quiet. I need to stay up there for at least a month to process this grief. I just wanted to let you know, so you do not worry when my phone goes to voicemail. Derek could not hide the profound relief in his voice. He sounded like a man who had just won the lottery. I think that is a brilliant idea, Victor. You absolutely need to go off the grid and find your peace. Do not worry about a single thing down here. Take a full month. Take 2 months if you need it. I will handle the clinic and doctors. You just focus on resting your tired body. Safe travels, Victor. He ended the call quickly, eager to celebrate his perceived victory. He thought he had successfully neutralized the final threat. He thought I was driving 5 hours north to sit by a frozen lake and cry. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and started the engine. I did not drive north toward Wisconsin. Instead, I drove straight into the industrial district on the edge of the city. I stopped at a massive commercial hardware supply store, the kind of place that catered strictly to professional contractors. I moved through the aisles with cold mechanical efficiency. I purchased a cheap, untraceable prepaid burner phone, paying with crisp $100 bills. I bought a high-definition fiber optic inspection camera with a 50-feet flexible cable typically used for examining compromised ventilation shafts. I picked up a set of directional parabolic microphones, heavy-duty wire cutters, lock-picking picks, and a tactical crowbar designed to pry open reinforced steel doors. I packed the gear into a black canvas duffel bag. I drove to the wealthy suburbs of the North Shore. Exactly 1 mile away from the towering iron gates of the Thorne family estate, there was a dilapidated roadside motel that had survived the gentrification of the area. The neon sign was missing half its letters. I walked into the dingy lobby and rented a room at the very back of the property, far away from the main road. I dropped my canvas bag onto the patterned bedspread. The room smelled intensely of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. I drew the thick blackout curtains tight, plunging the space into absolute darkness. I unpacked my tools, laying the fiber optic cables and microphones across the mattress in a neat, organized row. I picked up the burner phone and dialed Leon's secure number, giving him my new contact information. Derek and Evelyn thought they were dealing with an ignorant, grieving father who had simply surrendered and run away to hide in the woods. They had no idea they had just invited a master builder into their walls. The masks had slipped and the hunt had officially begun. I waited in the suffocating darkness of my motel room until the digital clock on the nightstand flashed 8. Derek and Evelyn were attending the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala tonight. It was a highly publicized black tie affair. They would be smiling for the cameras, shaking hands with wealthy donors, and playing the role of the exhausted, grieving family members, coping with my daughter's sudden tragic breakdown. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but their arrogance gave me the exact window of opportunity I needed. I dressed in dark tactical clothing and pulled a black knit cap low over my forehead. I slung the canvas duffel bag across my chest and slipped quietly out the back door of the motel. I did not take my truck. I walked the mile to the Thorne estate, sticking strictly to the heavy treeing that bordered the wealthy neighborhood. The freezing wind bit at my face, but the cold kept my mind razor sharp. I reached the towering iron gates and bypassed them entirely, moving to the eastern perimeter wall. I knew this property inside and out. 5 years ago, when Rachel and Derek first bought the estate, I had personally overseen the massive renovation project. I had upgraded the structural supports, reinforced the foundation, and most importantly, I had supervised the installation of their state-of-the-art security system. I knew every blind spot, every motion sensor, and every hardwired fail-safe. I climbed the stone wall and dropped silently onto the frost-covered grass. The house stood before me like a dark, looming fortress. I moved quickly to the utility access panel, hidden behind a row of thick evergreen bushes. With practiced precision, I pulled a pair of insulated wire cutters from my bag and severed the primary fiber optic line feeding the exterior alarm perimeter. The system was designed to instantly roll over to a cellular backup, but I had brought a localized signal jammer. I flipped the switch on the small black box in my pocket. The digital keypad on the back door flashed a bright, angry red for 3 seconds before dying completely. The house was now blind and deaf. I used my tactical crowbar to pop the lock on the heavy oak door, applying just enough precise upward pressure to bypass the deadbolt without leaving a scratch on the brass casing. I stepped inside the kitchen, closing the door behind me with a soft click. The silence in the massive house was absolute. I did not turn on my flashlight. I relied entirely on the ambient moonlight filtering through the tall glass windows and the architectural blueprints permanently etched into my memory. I moved through the lavish rooms with the silent, deliberate grace of a ghost. I was not here to break things or throw a violent tantrum. I was here to harvest data. I made my way to Evelyn's private parlor first. It was an opulent room decorated with expensive silk curtains and antique furniture. I placed my bag on the floor and pulled out the first microcamera. It was no larger than a button equipped with infrared night vision and a massive battery reserve. I climbed onto a sturdy velvet chair and carefully unscrewed the metal grating of the HVAC vent near the ceiling. I planted the tiny lens inside the ductwork, angling it perfectly to capture the entire room. I screwed the grate back into place, wiping away my fingerprints with a microfiber cloth. Evelyn would never think to look in the vents. Next, I moved silently down the hallway to Derek's home office. This was the true belly of the beast. The room smelled of expensive cologne and aged leather. I repeated the process, sliding a second micro camera into the ceiling vent directly above his massive mahogany desk. Now I would see every document he signed and hear every phone call he made. But audio and video were only half the battle. I needed hard, undeniable financial evidence to prove to a judge that Derek was entirely bankrupt and unfit to control my daughter's wealth. I stepped down from the vent and moved behind his desk. Derek was arrogant, but he was not stupid. His high-end desktop computer was locked down with complex biometric passwords. However, I did not need to log into his operating system to steal his secrets. I unzipped my bag and pulled out a specialized industrial USB cloning drive. Leon had given it to me, explaining that it was designed to bypass the software entirely and mirror the raw data directly from the hard drive motherboard. I plugged the device into the hidden port at the back of the computer tower. A small, pulsing blue light illuminated the dark corner of the office. The digital display on the cloner indicated that the extraction process would take exactly 4 minutes. I stood in the darkness watching the progress bar crawl across the tiny screen. 10%, 20%. The silence was deafening. Every creak of the old house settling sounded like a gunshot in my ears. I kept my eyes locked on the light, counting the seconds in my head. 50%, 70%. I was almost there. I was moments away from possessing the financial blueprints that would completely dismantle Derek's pristine lies. 90%. The device whirred softly. Then a metallic click echoed loudly through the silent house.